The state capture inquiry has just adjourned for the day. Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan will resume his testimony tomorrow. ENCA's Aldrin Sampear has been there the whole day and joins us live from Parktown. So, Aldrin, Pravin Gordhan, the man who came up, well, I suppose in a way, popularized the phrase connect the dots. It took a while for him to draw the dots for us to connect in this particular instance at the State Capture Commission of Inquiry. But we did glean some detail towards the end of the day.
Yeah, well, certainly. That's a nice way of putting that. The analogy is perfect, that we have been struggling to connect the dots, or trying to find the lines to connect the dots. And that's because, and this is the other thing about what's happening at the moment, is that you have Pravin Gordhan, who is who's being led to give his evidence, but this is information that we already know, and that's because of the that's because of his affidavit that was already leaked. So for most of us, this is really not new information, but because the Commission has to go through its own processes, which means that some of these things must be read into record, and that's the reason why some people may find that the testimony by Pravin Gordhan wasn't probably as explosive as the time when we first read his affidavit.
But we did get some detail, didn't we, Aldrin, around, for instance, the issue to do with nuclear procurement and the concerns that he says he had around the costs thereof and the rationale for it all.
Yeah, saying that it would cost government around 1 trillion rand, and this, he says, is the same amount of government expenditure, and that's the reason why they were against this nuclear deal. But it almost seemed as well as the time as well that there was this pressure that was coming from former President Jacob Zuma at the time. And remember that there was a committee that was set up, and that committee was chaired by Kgalema Motlanthe, who was then the deputy president of the country. And Kgalema Motlanthe was then removed, I think it was in June 2015 or June 2014. He was then removed from that committee, or rather it was just before the 2014 elections. He was removed from that committee, and Jacob Zuma then chaired that committee. And when asked about that move by the chairperson of the commission, Chairperson Raymond Zondo, Pravin Gordhan said that what he got is that there was a sense of urgency, and that's the reason why Kgalema Motlanthe was removed from that committee, and the former President Jacob Zuma, then chaired that committee.
And he's also been giving us a sense about the goings-on at Danelle and the establishment of this entity called Danelle Asia, which he has said on previous and on many occasions that the way it was established wasn't supposed to happen. It's not how things work, particularly in as far as state-owned enterprises are concerned.
Well, certainly, because they needed the approval from the Minister of Finance. And again, he speaks about this issue around that sense of urgency. He took us back to December the 9th, 2015, and Danelle is removed. He says then immediately an application from Danelle is then submitted to Treasury. And we know that the new Minister of Finance then comes in, Des van Rooyen. And within a couple of days, this issue is back on the table, even though Danelle had previously said that he does not agree with the Danelle, and it was VR Laser, which would then have become Danelle Asia, that he had not agreed with the deal. That matter was back on the table of Treasury, but then we know after 2 days, as Gordhan has indicated as well, he was back as the Minister of Finance, and that deal was stopped. He was then attacked, as he indicated, by the then chairperson of Danelle, Manja, who's now actually the lawyer of former President Jacob Zuma, who attacked him publicly. And he told Manja that you don't do that, you don't attack a minister publicly. And of course, we know that the relationship subsequently broke down.
And very interestingly also, Aldrin, they seem to not be able to find Salim Issa, who is the 50% shareholder in this particular joint venture, and therefore, as it stands, no matter how much they criticize it, no matter how much they say it wasn't supposed to come into being in the first place, Danelle Asia, in which a South African SOE holds a 50% stake, continues to exist. So while all of this was happening, Aldrin, outside there were protests and vociferous protests by the EFF and the BLF.
Yes, and the protests, as we know, is a protest that have been planned by the EFF, who have been accusing Pravin Gordhan of being an enabler of state capture. And there's again something that I said earlier on as well when I was speaking to one of the EFF, the secretary of the EFF here in Gauteng. Where is the evidence? Bring forward the evidence. And again, we heard from Floyd Shivambu making the same accusations that Pravin Gordhan is an enabler of state capture. Even Jackson Mthembu has said, bring that evidence. And today we just heard more of these allegations being made, and we're yet to see whether indeed the EFF will be submitting any of the evidence that they have to the State Capture Commission. He did raise the issue around the questions, though. This is now Floyd Shivambu. The questions that they sent to Pravin Gordhan, and remember that these questions are now also part of an investigation and a complaint that they've launched with the public protector, and looking into one of the accusations, which is that was Pravin Gordhan the person who handed over the so-called spy tapes, because they believe that Pravin Gordhan oversaw the establishment of the rogue unit, and the rogue unit, through what they were doing at the time and the intelligence, managed to get the audio recording of the conversation between Bulela Nquka as well as Leonard McCarthy at the time, and used that information, gave that information to then just president of the ANC, and they are saying that Pravin Gordhan used that tape as a bargaining tool to become Minister of Finance. And they believe as well that Pravin Gordhan does have some dealings with the Gupta family, and they want him to come clean and step down.
Well, he did urge the South African public to connect the dots. I suppose the EFF will say that's exactly what they are doing, connecting their own dots. ENCA's Aldrin Sampear out in Parktown covering the State Capture Commission of